Ellie, I just want to thank you. Thank you for having us. And I'm honored to be able to speak with Erin Nelson. I'm I think now 30-year veteran in the marketing space, mostly here in the Cedar Rapids area, Cedar Rapids, Iowa City area. So I think of myself as a trusted partner for leaders in any position. My brand survey, if you have 3 words that describe Deb Rolfus, as I interviewed 50 people that I'd worked with over my career, it's tenacious, number 1. Number 2 is team player and team leader. And number 3 is creative problem solver. So one of our VPs of international said, I have a way of getting stuff done, or the important stuff done, except he didn't use the word stuff. He used another S word. And then the VP of, or the president of Center Equity Learning, he said, if there would be a 4th word, fun would be your 4th word. So that's Deb. Erin?
Well, having worked with you, Deb, I can attest those are all true. I am an associate professor at Iowa currently. I teach strategy. So strategy and getting the most out of your leadership team and your just general teams in your organization and helping drive your strategic outcomes are really my wheelhouse that I teach. I teach in the MBA program. I also am on the board of directors for the Iowa Children's Museum, and I'm going through the new board leadership program through the city and different partnerships throughout Iowa City area. So today we're going to come together and talk with you a little bit about why metrics matter and using AI specifically to help us think about how to make our metrics better. So Deb.
So then our next slide, let's just jump right in and use our chat feature to be able to answer, how do you measure your mission? So in your chat, just go in and put an answer. And since we have a small group, Erin, I'm just going to go ahead and ask you to kick us off with what you think, how you measure your mission.
I'm going to put in the chat number of individuals served. That could be a way to measure my mission.
Excellent. Hey, we got one, total assets and total grants out. That's 2. That's bonus. She gets a gold star for today. Nice job. I'm going to add in number or total dollar raised. Eric and I have our winners. We both had the same answer at the same time. So we'll take that. So there's other metrics out there that can be used to measure your mission. Like, number of participants. Ooh, Trisha with personal interactions. Nice. This is another great one. Total amount of school districts we provide local food to. You must be a community food provider. Total amount paid to local farmers for food. Great examples of looking at that impact that you have on the greater community. So Erin, let's go ahead and advance to our next slide. And let's talk about why metrics matter. And I won't bore you with the big details, but metrics matter because they tell the full story. They complete the picture, if you will. So as we define key performance indicators, or KPIs, they are measurable values that indicate our progress towards strategic goals. And if you want that refresher on strategic goals, Erin presented on that last fall, so you can go back and look at that webinar on how do you make strategic goals, the value of strategic goals, and using those to help move your organization forward. When we talk about KPIs, we talk about how they translate your vision into actionable data. And you use those to track your progress and your overall effectiveness of your organization. And today we're going to really do a deep dive into the connection of non-financial metrics to financial metrics, and then the overall relationship that those measures have on your organization's mission. So Erin, go ahead and advance our slide again. So let's talk about what we measure. The first one is financial measures, and these are things like revenue, expenses, margins. They're highly established. They're standard across organizations and industries, nonprofit and for-profit industries. These are so common that they don't really need to be explained. So we're going to go into the non-financial metrics. And the reason we do that is because financial metrics just tell part of that story. They don't tell the complete picture of how an organization is performing. So by adding in non-financial metrics, we're able to see how you and your team get the information you need to achieve your company's, strategic objectives. So when non-financial measures are identified, analyzed, and acted upon, organizations will advance their strategies. So I think about like this simple example of, a system was changed in your internal operations that allows customers to be processed, and customers could be anybody, like when you talk about number of people served at the food bank, or donors, processing donor funding. If you're able to reduce that processing time that used to take 1 day per customer, and you reduced it down to now you can do it, and instead of 3 days, so it took you 3 days to do it, now it takes you just 1 day. So it allows you to process customers 3 times faster, and you're able to serve more. So this is an example of measuring your mission, because you're measuring that you can serve 3 times more, and your impact impacts 3 times more people. So that's how we kind of look at the financial metrics to the non-financial metrics to the financial metrics. So then let's go and talk about KPIs when they go wrong. So KPIs can be tricky. When there is misalignment, this happens when there's not linking the measures to an organization's strategic goals. So they could be poorly defined, or they can be non-actionable KPIs. So an example of this would be like a self-serving measure that makes like one person or one department look really good to earn their bonus, perhaps, but they're not really leading to the desired impact. So an example would be, a supervisor I want to have 10 public speaking events in a year, but the events that he's speaking at, he or she or they have no impact into your organization's mission. So it's reaching the wrong people and not really leading and contributing to the overall impact that you want your organization to have. The other one is vanity metrics. These are numbers that look great and, give you that gold star, but they don't actually drive into meaningful action that leads to the mission. So some of those would be like only measuring social media likes, but not measuring like volunteer signups. So in this case, social media likes are leading indicators of success, while the volunteer signups are the lagging indicators of success. So you want to make sure that if you're using vanity metrics, that you're tying in with a lagging indicator that actually moves towards your strategic goals. And the last one where data can go wrong is the data limitations. This could be too much or too little that is causing confusion and inaction. So like if you're having too many, data is like you just have this whole big screen in front of you and you don't know where to start, what matters. You're just, it's like a fog. You're sitting in a fog and you don't know where to go next. Well, on the flip side, too little data limits good decision making. So kind of think about like systems and processes that aren't collecting the data that you need. Or another example is limited data is bias. If you have a loud, voice at the table, that's drowning out all the other voices. So it's good data, but that alone limits you to understand like the complete picture. So you want to make sure that you're hearing from capturing the data from all voices, because a lot of times there's this silent majority that you want to that are keeping quiet, but you want to make sure that you capture their insights and data from them to make sure that you're getting the best picture. Because ultimately, good data reduces the amount of judgment calls that us in leadership positions sometimes have to make. So you want to be able to make good judgment calls when possible. So then let's move into our non-financial causal model. And this is a model that has been put out through research that helps us prioritize our resources. So as you look from left to right, when you can see what's truly driving impact, you can focus your efforts on the most effective programs and avoid spending time on activities that don't contribute to real change. And Ellie and I were just talking about this before our webinar even started, of metrics that you could collect but don't really drive the impact that she wants. So the thing that this does allows you to strengthen your grant applications and funding requests. So you think about funders want to see a clear connection between what you do and the outcomes that you achieve. So this causal model helps demonstrate your nonprofit's effectiveness in a data-driven way. It takes that objectivity out of it, or non-objectivity out of it. The other thing this does is supports that continuous improvement. By tracking the steps in your model, you can identify what's working, what's not, and then adjust accordingly. For example, if tutoring improves literacy, but book distribution alone doesn't, you might shift your resources to expanding your tutoring programs. So let's go into this example here. It's an example for literacy programs. So you look at your inputs. These are like your trained volunteers, your donated books that were received. And then the activities are those volunteers that are tutoring children weekly, are giving away free books to children. And then you go and see your outputs, the number of hours tutoring that had been completed, the number of books distributed. And then the outcomes are improved reading scores, increased confidence in reading, more books read at home. And then the impact, which gets right to your mission, is better academic performance and higher graduation rates. Simple, right? So Erin, I'm going to bring you in on this one here as we talk about the next slide is building this non-financial causal model. So, we have these 5 steps, and the number one is start with your mission. And, what are those long-term impact you are trying to create? So Erin, I think at the top of the hour, we talked about some of those mission, the impacts that we're trying to create. So do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so actually through our BLP program, we were looking at different websites, and I was noticing that certain websites have that impact, that mission statement in that impact measure right there together in the front page. And others, I was asking myself, okay, what evidence do I have that you're achieving your mission? And so thinking about ways to tie those metrics really clearly to your impact, this will help you not only communicate with someone like me who's just observing your website, but of course, all kinds of stakeholders would be wanting to know that sort of impact, those impact metrics that are proving you're accomplishing your mission. And those can be really hard to boil down for some organizations to just 1 or 2 key measures that you're tracking over time. It can be really difficult. But if you are able to track those, it does tell the clear story.
Yeah, and I think the clear story goes into our number 2, which is identify those key outcomes. And the outcomes are the stories that organizations want to be able to tell, and those measurable changes that indicate success. So in that literacy program, we talked about better student achievement, better student outcomes. What are some other measurable changes that could indicate success?
Yeah, so just thinking about what are some of those at the point of interaction with our key stakeholder, what are maybe some of those medium-term indicators that could help us say, okay, we had this engagement with someone, then something happened, and then we collectively, after having a lot of these outcomes build up over time, we have this big impact that we've achieved. And so thinking about your immediate delivery, your sort of midterm progress checks or goals that you're trying to accomplish to show you're moving a bigger collection of people toward your bigger mission, and then what is that big mission impact?
Yeah, and you talk about number 3, like the map out your activities, and you did such a great job. And my mind went right to the visual of scorecards that I've created, where it's like, all right, we've got our annual goal and what our annual results we want to have, and then it's like, all right, what does quarter 1 look like, quarter 2 look like, quarter 3 look like, and 4, and we map out those activities that we're going to use in that quarter, and then down by month of how we get there. And it's all those actions contribute to that ultimate outcomes that we're looking at.
Yeah, it helps people focus, it helps people align. The other thing that it does is it helps us figure out if there's anything we should stop doing, right? Time is precious. And Michael Porter, sort of the guru of strategy, would say that the essence of strategy is choosing what not to do. And so sometimes by mapping out these activities, we might find that there's a program that's maybe not the most valuable use of our time anymore, and could potentially divert efforts into this more high impact activity set.
We could give whole presentations on the power of saying no. And what makes it easy to say no is going into number 4, is that gather data and test assumptions. The testing assumptions allows us to use data to say yes or no to continuing an activity. When a test goes poorly, or test comes back with, well, that didn't give us anything, then stop doing it. That if that data isn't leading you to help you make your decisions moving forward and helping advance your strategic goals, then let's try something else.
If you don't mind me jumping in, back to 2 and 3, one thing we've learned in kind of doing this KPI identification is also making sure that the metrics that we're identifying are things we can control. So we had in our strategic plan a metric specific to kind of donor alignment with our giving strategies, which is great and interesting. And we were like, oh, it turns out we can't control where our donors are giving. We can maybe influence, but we can't actually control that number. So having a specific number goal on it wasn't helping us show any effort that we were doing. So we ended up switching that metric over, just like changing it a little bit to how many connections are we making with our donors about alignment with our priorities. So that's something to think about too, as you're identifying your outcomes and what metrics you're going to use, is like, can we control that metric? Because if not, why are we looking at it?
Great example, Ellie, and so proud of you guys for recognizing that and making sure that, all right, let's change this. If this is really going to work for us, let's change this. And when you're testing those things, they're not big changes, then they're small changes, and it doesn't feel quite so intimidating to change something, because it's like, once you recognize that it's not working, then you can change it. And
She frees up.
I'm good. Are you good?
Yeah.
So then, Erin, and number 5 is our last one, the refine and communicate your model, and use the model to make strategic decisions and engage funders. And I think Ellie's example was just right on target for that.
Well, thanks, Deb. We are going to keep moving on then, and we're going to get to thinking about how does AI help us with any of this, right? We all use AI, potentially not at all, or to multiple times and fully integrated to your daily work stream. So wherever you are on the AI journey, there is research being done around organizations using AI to help them improve their metrics. And so we're going to get into that a little bit, and then we're going to take a look at how to do it ourselves. But before we jump in, I do feel I need to give a public service announcement. For those of you who are not used to using ChatGPT or any other large language model, could be Claude, could be Copilot, whatever it might be. Once you start this activity, because you have organizational information, I want you to always go into this assuming it is a public conversation. I also want you to get into the practice of anonymizing your data or your organizational name, just to try and protect your sensitive information. And one way that you can do it is, instead of using it as an internet browser, you can actually use it locally on your computer. And so I have a link here to Ellie. Will they get the slides? Will the slides be available?
Sure.
Yep. Okay. So there's this hyperlink here to a video that walks you through how to use it, not as a web browser, but on your machine, so that you have a little bit more control. The data that you put into it in that case does not leave your machine, does not leave your hard drive. So thinking about that as a way to protect yourself. Also, if you're going to use ChatGPT, which tends to be one of the more common ones, you can go into your settings and you can toggle off that you want to improve the model. When you have it on, it's on by default. That means your data is going out into the model to train. And so you don't want this released out into the model. Also, there is a new feature on ChatGPT where you can have a temporary chat. And when you click temporary, the screen turns black and it tells you with a little note that this is not going to be given back out to the model. So just trying to think through different ways to protect yourself, protect your organization's information. All right, so be safe. There was some research that was done in 2023. They looked at 3,000 organizations and were asking them, do you use AI to help you improve your metrics? And quite a few of them are, about 30% of them are. And so then they focused in on those 30% and they started to ask, how are you using it? And what outcomes are you seeing? And so for the organizations that reported using it, they also reported greater efficiency for many of the reasons we talked about, more alignment in there and cohesion around the activities that are being done inside the organization to drive their impact. They also felt that their measurements became more precise. They before were measuring things that were maybe too nebulous. They didn't quite know what to do with it, or it was hard to turn it into action. But with these more precise measurements from the AI interactions, they were able to refine their dashboards, refine their metrics, and have better ability to turn it into action. They also saw more financial benefit for this very reason, less wasted effort and increased collaboration amongst their employees and their stakeholders, because they were able to have a very clear story about what it is they were driving. So in terms of how people were using the metrics, there were 3 big activity sets that people were engaging in. One is to use AI to help them improve their existing metrics. So this would be an example of when I would tell you, you could put your whole strategic plan in. You could put all of your metrics in and say, hey, help us improve these. You can do that safely. You could put your whole strategic plan in and all of your metrics in and say, what are we missing? What should we be measuring that we're not? What are some new metrics? You could put in your area of service and say, what do other people in our area measure? Maybe it's in our industry, maybe it's, we're a children's museum. What do other children's museums in the country measure? What are we missing? And then you can also use it to establish relationships, more like these cause and effect, or that causal model type of thinking, in terms of, if we do this, then is this impacting that? So in a way to do it, I've got the steps here for you, and we will go through not all of these steps today, but I just want to show you here as a full activity. You would give the AI your sort of background knowledge about your organization, what it is you're trying to accomplish, and your measures that you're using, and ask it, is it aligned? Then you could describe your industry or your service type and ask it, what are benchmarks that other people use in this same service model? And then what should we change as a result? The example on improving that we're going to go through today is a little bit more specific around one data point. This would be a way to do it in terms of a cluster, but you can also do it around a single data point. How can I improve this single metric? Creating new. Okay. Again, give it your information about you and what you're doing, what you're trying to track. Ask what's missing. Describe your competitors or the landscape and ask what they're doing and what new things should we track. Now, this one, you may want to, with your team, build that causal model that we showed before around inputs, activities, outcome to impact, and then ask it to validate it. Or you could put that in, and then you could put all of your metrics in and say, align our metrics to our causal model. Or you could put your metrics in and say, hey, take this set of metrics and build a causal model. And then you could see what it builds and compare it to what you and your team have built. Right? So there's different ways to play around with the approach on this establishing the relationships. But basically, this AI interaction will be able to tell you, and this interaction will lead to an analysis that will be able to tell you, is there something here? By having all these likes on this social media page, is that leading to volunteers who sign up? By speaking at this event, is that leading to donations? So what are the relationships? So we're going to see it in action. So we're taking our literacy program idea from before. We've just given it a name. It's a fake program. It's the Seattle Literacy Program, and it has this mission to improve literacy rates among children in underserved communities. At our Seattle Literacy Program, we have noticed that we collect student satisfaction data through post-program surveys. But response rates are low, insights are limited. We also are looking at staff and volunteer engagement. We're looking at this through annual self-reported satisfaction surveys. The challenge, though, is we don't really have a lot of real-time data. We don't really know how to address issues during the year. We can't really be proactive. It just feels like all this time has passed and now we have this information and we didn't have it at the time we needed to make the change. We're also starting to see our volunteers are leaving. Our tutors are leaving. Why? And we're starting to suspect maybe there's some sort of barrier there in terms of the activities that we're asking them to do. Like they come in thinking they're going to be a tutor, but then we actually ask them to do a bunch of administrative stuff too. And is that causing turnover? So is there a connection here between an input and an activity? So going back to our causal model from a few slides ago, thinking about these and then analyzing which of these metrics fall into which place on our causal model. So this first one, student satisfaction, would be at the point of service delivery, right? All the service delivery that they've received over a period of time. It's an output metric, and we're trying to improve that metric. Staff and volunteers, it's input. We're trying to create that, make it better, make something more useful out of it. And then we're trying to understand, is there a relationship between the people we're bringing in and what we're asking them to do that's causing turnover? So we're trying to establish that relationship. So when you go to your AI prompt, you need to know what you're going to do with it, right? It's just a blank screen staring at you. So you need to have some idea of what it is you want it to do. Are you having it look at things from a holistic, more strategic level? Or are you dialing it down to one specific metric maybe that you want to improve or create, improve or establish a relationship around or to make better? So here in this first one with the student survey, student satisfaction survey, I have a few questions you could ask the chat. For the create, we have a few questions you could engage the chat around, and we're going to pull these in just a minute. I'll show you how they work. Or we could have a different set of questions that we would ask it if we were wanting to establish that relationship between, is there a relationship between these two things? So I'm gonna pull over my handy window. I'm gonna put us into temporary so you can see what that looks like. It says, won't appear in my history, won't create any memories. It won't be used to train the models. So let's start with our student satisfaction. Prompt here. So I'm engaging a survey. So maybe I need to change my survey. Maybe that's the improvement I need to make for my students, is to get more information through a better survey. So it's going to give me some new questions I could ask to improve my current survey. And then I can go through this list. I can compare it to what I have. I can see if there maybe are areas where a cluster of questions I'm not really asking about that might be helpful. Okay, so that's a way to improve my data collection. But maybe I want to think about, maybe there's something more than just this student survey. So my next question could be, what are some leading indicators that could help measure student engagement beyond these surveys, beyond survey responses? So then now it's going to give me a few other metrics I could use. Participation rates, punctuality, participation in a discussion. These could all be around my attendance and participation metric cluster. Maybe I could do something around, you know, tracking their progress and using learning analytics, their behavior while they're there. Right? But what is the story I'm trying to understand about them would help me understand which of these metrics or metric sets might be useful for me to add in. So it's going to give me a lot of options here. It loves to please you, wants to give you a lot of material to work with. All right, so it's given me some ideas. How can I improve my student survey that I'm already using? And is there anything else I could be measuring? So I'm trying to improve that student satisfaction. Now, moving to the next one that we were talking about, which is sort of measuring volunteer engagement. This was the one where we were doing an annual self-survey, wasn't very actionable, couldn't really get a lot of insights or solve problems in the point of problem. So maybe I've decided that the way we're measuring it is just wrong or not helpful, and I want to create something. In this first example, I wanted to improve it. Now I'm just like, let's create something. So I need to create a new KPI measure. New KPI to measure volunteer engagement. Can you help define a meaningful metric based on behavioral indicators rather than self-reported surveys? Because I might lie to you, right? I might just say, yeah, I'm fully engaged. This was great, right? But I'm not, because I don't want to tell you I'm not.
And Erin, that made me giggle because that gets into that people bias.
Yep. Yep. So how can we measure it other ways? Let's see what it says. Well, it's told us right now that we probably want to use some of these behavioral indicators rather than the self-reported data. Well, it's got a very complicated volunteer engagement index for us. We could decide if we want to do that. We could look at attendance rate. It's telling us how to calculate that. Retention rate, active participation rate. And then it tells us a little bit about, okay, if you really did want to implement this, I've already told you what it is. I've told you how to calculate it. Now I'm going to give you some information around how to implement it. Data collection methods.
I love the weighing the factors, because there is, you know, it's like sometimes there's just more, one data point has just more relevancy than others, but the other ones kind of give you that full picture.
Yep. And then you could decide to roll these in on a phased plan, right? So you're going to take the one that's the highest weighted, and you're like, okay, for the first 6 months, we're just going to bring this one online because it's going to take us a bit to implement it. And then once we have that one online, then the next highest weighted one should come in. And then over a period of time, your goal is, of course, to have the full weighted cluster together to give you 100% weighting. But it would, to your point, Deb, it would help make decisions around how to implement this if you were to do it phased. And also rolling it out like that, it could help you then test a little bit around what is your actual target rate that you're looking for. You could test some assumptions there and make some adjustments as you start to get the data and use the metric. But it's giving you some sample calculations. It's like a little math teacher here. It's walking you through all this. So that would be a way for you to ask it, how can I create something new? Here's another question that we had on there. I'm going to pop it in there. Okay, so you've given me all this. That's great. Can you suggest methods to measure volunteer interactions in a way that predicts long-term engagement? Right, so these are all ways to maybe take a snapshot of the present moment. What about for the long term? What else could I be looking at?
And Erin, I'm glad you asked both ways, because in the example, it talked about like that end of the year survey is like too long to go if students and the volunteers are dissatisfied, you know, in month one or, you know, quarter one.
And we also have that turnover problem, right? So we're trying to understand a couple of different things, but maybe we could do something here that can help us contribute positively to reducing turnover of our volunteers. So interaction frequency, depth of engagement in activities, peer and student interactions. There's all kinds of different ways it's proposing here that you could track metrics around sort of predicting long-term engagement out of your volunteers. Again, way more than you need. You're not going to be able to implement all of this. So it's going to be your choice to be a savvy consumer and start to think through, what are we already doing and what feels like an appropriate lift or cadence to bring some of these new things in.
You know, Erin, as I'm watching AI come up with this, it reminds me of sitting in a big conference room and you've got all these different voices and you're just brainstorming ways that you can collect data and measure data. This just gives you another person at the table that's, you know, analyzing tons more organizations that are trying to do these same things. So that just is bringing in experience that, you know, people at the table might not have.
Yeah, for sure. Or time to figure out, right? The AI can do some of this deeper processing that it might take us a while to get there ourselves. We could get there potentially, but it would just take a lot of analysis, a lot of research, a lot of time.
100%.
Now let's move into that third one, that establishing the relationships. So we have high turnover in our volunteers. We're wondering if there's a connection with who we're bringing in and what they're asking them to do. But it's a hunch. We want to see if there's a way to figure that out. So I want to analyze the relationship between volunteer workload and retention rates. Can you help me identify correlations and potential predictive metrics?
And Erin, as I'm, you know, as the AI is contributing, I was just thinking about when you talked about like the time it takes, like for us to come up with all those types of things, that would be a half a day meeting with top leaders in there. And it's like, this is just coming out in seconds. It's like just the amount of resources AI is saving organizations is tremendous. And, you know, bringing that experience and value into it. Not saying everything is correct here by AI, folks.
No. But it's definitely giving you, like you were saying, a brainstorm partner, right? Then you'd want to go in and really dig in and validate and think about how you could apply it to your organization. But if you notice here, as step 3, it hits a wall and it says, upload your data set. So it will help you, but it's like, I can only walk you through it so much. I need to just get the data and show you how to do it. So it will give you ideas. It will do the analysis. And this is where we started talking about protecting your data and whatnot. But here, let's see, what data points, here's another question. Much like the other question around long-term, this one, because we're really thinking about volunteer retention, can AI identify early warning signs that a volunteer might disengage? So looking at their attendance, looking at how long they're coming for, how frequently they're engaging with activities.
You know, and I was just looking at these as, you know, I was a active member for American Cancer Society for years, and I could tell as soon as someone had disengaged, it's like they were no longer attending the meetings. You know, you could ask them to do something, but it would be delayed or late. And, you know, we all have things that come up and that happen in our lives. So those were just, you know, right spot on as I think about my time as a volunteer.
Exit surveys, whether or not those are truthful is another question, but exit surveys, matching with a mentor. For example, Ellie, wonderful mentor. Ellie was my mentor, was on the Iowa Children's Museum board. All
I
right,
think I learned more from Erin than she learned from me.
not true. All right, so getting back to our original question, the first question we had asked for this last cluster was really getting into sort of analyzing causality and relationships there, and it was asking for more data. But I could also put in what data points should I collect to measure the impact of administrative workload on tutor retention. This could be another way for me to go about it. Time spent on administrative tasks, number of non-tutoring responsibilities, frequency of required meetings, complexity of tasks, self-reported burnout. So there's lots of different ways here that we could start to think about questions that we could be asking to try and gather more data or tracking information. So that is sort of a demo of how we could use ChatGPT for our organization here to think about how to solve some of these challenges without going to the highest level of the strategic plan. So you could tackle it for smaller questions, you can tackle it for really big holistic questions as well. So I think from here, Deb and I just wanted to give a little summary from my perspective on getting started with AI. What I really recommend is having a conversation with your board of directors or your leadership team if you're not a senior leader in your organization. If you're not interfacing with your board of directors, then please let the people around you know that you're using this, because there are transparency concerns, there are ethical concerns. Someone might have some skill sets here that you didn't know about that you could leverage, right? So just, I would keep that conversation really open about how you intend to use it before you use it and get people on board with you. Make sure you're using the most secure version that you can get access to in the most secure way. And as an extra layer of protection, I would anonymize and use fake names for things just to try and get the content to work with. As you notice, like the questions that I put in for those 3 examples didn't have the name of the organization in it. It was Seattle Literacy Program, and it's not in the name that I put into the ChatGPT. So thinking about how you can maybe creatively ask the question without having to give a lot of private sensitive information to the machine. And then critically evaluate the output. As you saw, there's way too much there. So just what really is useful for you. Deb?
And along that, when you're talking about building better metrics, you know, I would question, you know, do your metrics align with your mission and your strategic goals? Really dig in and ask the logical questions. Like, this metric, is it really matching what our impact that we want it to have on our community? The other one is use that combination of those tried and true financial metrics with those non-financial metrics. Build those relationships there, and make sure that one is feeding the other so you get the whole picture of what's going on in your organization and if progress is making, or are you making the progress that you want? And I guess that validate those relationships between the metrics, test and validate to make sure that they are achieving what you want to answer the questions. Are we effective? Is our input actually driving the impact that we want? So always make sure to test and then, make small tweaks as you go along. So it's not a big overhaul, if you will, on the changes.
Ellie, we have a few minutes if you have. I don't think any came in the chat. Does anybody want to just ask?
I had a couple
Eric.
questions, Aaron and Deb. Maybe one simple one and one more complicated that you kind of alluded to. I assume one of the challenges I've had in the past is measures that are simple to measure or data that's simple to get versus, so it could be a great measure, but you get bogged down in getting the data. It's complicated, it's manual, whatever. I assume you could type into the AI to rank the measures by level of simplicity, maybe to gather the data, thinking start simple and then get more complicated as you go.
The thing I love about this is you just play with it. Yeah, I would ask it.
Yeah,
Which
maybe.
rank them by order of implementation ease.
Yeah, got it. The other question. Oh, go ahead, Deb.
I would also add to that, Eric, because I was thinking along that same line. Test it. Test that theory of how you think it is. The other one that is going to be your gotcha on that is some areas, some organizations going to be simple to achieve or to acquire that data, and other organizations might be really hard. So
Yeah.
I would also add, what alternatives to this data could I use to collect something similar that would give you directionally the data that you want to help you make those decisions.
True, yeah. It would vary by organization as to their capability to get the other question you
got to think about the systems and processes behind the data, because good data in equals good data out. Bad data in equals bad data out. So if you start with good data, your decisions are going to be that much better because it's going to output good data.
Yeah. Maybe one other thought, maybe from you alluded to it, but say I'm using AI, doing the work that you just shared, which is an amazing amount of work in a short period of time, but it could also be done without bringing the board or the leadership team along with you. So the positive is you don't have to go through a 4 or 8 hour offsite meeting, kind of moving at the pace of the slowest, least common denominator. No offense to anybody, but you're moving at this pace, but the positive is you could go fast. The negative is maybe they're not bought in. They don't feel the same level of buy-in as if they were offsite for a day and see the big. Any thoughts on how to get both, go fast and get buy-in?
Yeah, I would approach, if you're the executive director, CEO, I would approach the board. If you're under an executive director or CEO, I would approach them and I would say, hey, I went to this webinar. I want to play around. What concerns do you have? Can I use a half a day to see if I can put something together to have a little bit of a plan for what changes we could make based on some recommendations that I'm able to get out of my interaction with this AI.
Yeah.
And it could be then that it turns into a proposal that maybe then, you're like, here's my feasibility plan in terms of how we could implement these and what the impact might be. But I think that you asking for maybe a little bit of time, their blessing, their knowledge blessing, plus a little bit of time, because as you can see, you could really come up with some cool stuff, even if you just played for maybe like a Friday afternoon or something, right?
Well, you're spot on. There's actually a guy I served with that worked at the university. He had a quote that I've never forgot that said, it's easier to critique than create. And so if you can put something out and the group can start critiquing it, but if you take the group time to create, it takes a lot of time and effort and, all over the place. Might even take multiple sessions. So what you're showing, I think, and what I was thinking is an opportunity to have something that you could critique versus, so take a little time to create, then get quickly to the critique rather than having to create with the group.
Eric, I think that is spot on, because I was thinking that same thing. If it was me going up to the board, it was like I would have like this list of all the metrics that I think we could track and collect, because then it gives you that time to vet out, do we have the systems and processes in place to track
To
this
do that.
measure and,
Yeah.
and make sure that we have good information from it. Because if it's not good and you can't do it, then there's no reason to bring it up in front of the board.
Right.
Because
Right.
time is money for your board members. So you want to make sure that you're getting as much out of them as you can, because they have that extra experience. So if you can use that time to just vet things out before you present. The other thing I was going to suggest is if you just want to even play with AI, like, on the weekend, or, just an hour of your own time. And I had a good friend that, was using AI to help with a family planning trip, and just going in and doing something personal just to kind of help validate like the process and the thinking. So if there's something personal that you like, okay, what my goal is for my 5-year goal is to, run a 10K. How would I do that? And what kind of metrics do I need to track? And, what are those? And, kind of ask those questions and make it personal. Then, that's not, naming you specifically, but I think that there's ways that you can test it without having your organization or asking your board for time before you feel comfortable using it.
Sure. Helpful. Yeah, thanks.
Something that the three of us were talking about before everyone joined on was, Ellie had said, well, there's no point in tracking certain metrics because we're not going to use it for decision making. So I think that another thing, Eric, would be, you could play around and get some prototype together and then get some feedback around like, what of this would help us make better decisions, right? And how can this be useful to us? How can this be useful to me, to my team, to the executive director, to the board? Like, what layers of information and data do they need to make better decisions?
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, an
Go ahead, Deb.
old marketing fundamental we would ask ourselves when doing like a quantitative market research study is, what would we do with this information that we get from this question? And if we weren't going to take any action from the question, we removed it. So that way there wasn't survey fatigue that would happen. So think about that from a board fatigue too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have always been a bit skeptical of using AI, especially in writing specifically. Like, using it to write things makes me crazy because I'm an English major, and so it gives me the jitters. But I do think thinking of it too as kind of this like generative body, and then you can from there make it your own and critique it. And it's never like this will give us final product. It's always thinking of it as kind of brainstorm starting place. That I think also is easier to make the case to your board and executive director for why you'd use it, right? Like, this does that initial piece. We still have to do the work to make it ours. But I think that also kind of quells some fears about having it do the work for you.
We call him Chad, the overeager intern. So just think of him as the overeager intern. He's there to just really do too much for you.
Any other questions for Erin and Deb? Alrighty. Well, we have contact information for Erin and Deb. If you have follow-up questions, let me know. We can e-connect you to the two of them directly. There they are. Also, we will put slides up on the website as well as the recording so you can share out with your teams, and maybe share with your board and say, hey, this is what I learned. You can learn it too. That piece is easy. Awesome. If there's nothing else, thank you very much, Erin and Deb. We appreciate your time sharing this information and skills with us. And I'm sure it will go far and wide through the recording. So appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.